All right. I'm really excited because today we're going to talk about a couple topics that, frankly, I really wish I knew more about when I was kind of earlier in my career. How to trust yourself and how to manage up, which is something I literally wish someone sat me down and talked to me about this. Anytime in the past 20 years would have been great. And I'm really excited to have an amazing, awesome human and expert to talk about this with. Her name is Melody Wilding. She is the author of two books. Her first book is one I have read, which is called Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. Boy, that's a good topic, especially now. And she has a new book coming out in just a few weeks, and it's called Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. I love that so much. Melody is an award-winning executive coach, and she has helped top performers at most successful companies that you all know, from Google to Amazon to Meta to JP Morgan, to go from people pleaser to respected leader. I love that so much. To turn self-doubt into confident presence and fast track their careers. Melody, thank you so much and welcome to Reinventability.
I'm so thrilled to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. I always like to ask my guests first a question before we kind of dive into the core topic. Um, what has been one of your most kind of significant or challenging or favorite reinventions that you've gone through?
I think I'm in the thick of one as we speak, as we are having this conversation, going from my first book, Trust Yourself, and really the whole persona around that and who I was when I wrote that book
Mm,
to who I am now. And the whole topic and essence of managing up. And when I wrote Trust Yourself, it came out in 2021. And so I was writing it 2019, 2020. We all know what happened then. And that book is all about being a highly sensitive person in the workplace. And, it definitely represented a side of me that was more gentle and nurturing and approachable and kind and empathetic, which is obviously a huge part of who
sure.
I am. But I felt like all of this time, that was only who I could be. And there was this
Mm,
other side of me. You and I were talking before we hit record that we're both from the tri-state area. I grew up in New Jersey, and so I credit a lot of my attitude and fast talking and everything to that.
I love it.
And I just started to feel over the last couple of years in particular that there was this more direct, no nonsense, very pragmatic
Mm,
side of me that I had to tamp down in order to be what people expected from the sensitive striver lady, which is a concept I talk about in Trust Yourself. And so it's been a journey of stepping into more confidence, more boldness, a little bit more swagger and directness. And it's been uncomfortable in a lot of ways. So yeah, I'm reporting from the front lines here with my own
yeah.
reinvention.
Well, I'm so thrilled to hear your answer. I didn't know. I know your work. I didn't know what you were going to say, and I just want to tell you, I didn't realize we have that much in common because I have been. I haven't talked about this on this podcast. I should do an episode about it because I've gone through something similar, or am going through something similar. For a decade, I was the happiness person. And I talked about happiness and well-being and recovering from burnout and emotional fitness. And I had a much it was the softer side of me. And it's
Hmm.
still a very big part of me. But one thing I realized about this time last year, maybe a little earlier, is that there was this whole other part of me, kind of the badass 4 times entrepreneur, former investor, ran tech companies, raised money from venture capitalists, was a venture capitalist, like tough cookie, straight talking, as you said, that I have sort of like literally put in a box, shut it down, and then put in the back of my brain. And when I started to kind of open it up a little, because I felt like I was missing a piece of myself, I actually felt like I wasn't being true to the people I mentor or on stage. It was very uncomfortable because, right? Well, actually, I want to ask you what's uncomfortable, because I know it was uncomfortable, but what is it about this that is challenging for you?
I mean, let me just say you articulated that. I feel like we're living a double life
Yeah,
because
I love
that
that.
I completely resonate with everything you were saying, and it's exhausting to feel like you're wearing a mask a
Yeah,
lot of the time.
yeah.
And what what has been really important for me is noticing areas where I feel a sense of resentment growing. And if
Mm,
I feel,
good.
I was starting to feel resentful that I had to always show up as being so understanding and empathetic. And it started to feel like a lot of emotional labor. And that's when I started to know, like, oh, something's brewing here that needs my attention. And so what has the hardest part been? I think worrying about people's reaction, right? That's still the
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
pleaser within me, that what if I say something that offends someone? They
Yeah.
don't like it.
Yeah.
It's hard to shake that part of you, especially when you live more of a quote unquote public life.
Yeah.
Like a lot of your thought leadership is on display literally for people to like or not like and comment on. So
Yeah.
that's been scary to step into that more and put ideas out there and just kind of wait for the response. Yeah. How about you though?
Well, so this is really, I think this might be a gift that I didn't know I have for you. Always try to give my guests a gift. Sometimes I send them something. I might do that too, like a piece of my art that you see behind me. But here's the gift. So I did not know you. I'd read your book after you sent it to me, but I was not familiar with your work. So the only exposure that I have to you is in the last year or so, right? So to the fuller, more authentic current you. And the reason I feel like my getting to say this to you is a gift because it's such a powerful reminder. Not once did I have, and I read your stuff on LinkedIn, right? Like, not once did I think, wow, what an asshole. Wow, what is up with that? I mean, Melody, can you tone that down? Can you be a
Oh.
little more compassionate? Not once did I have that reaction. And the reason that I feel like it's a gift is because um, we have this story of ourselves, right? That we create, right? Like you said, and I said. And then we imagine that that's a story everyone else is holding. Whereas I think that people mostly encounter us as we are. I don't think anyone hangs on to that very much. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And it's also kind of healing for me to say that and hear it myself because I haven't experienced that either, right? I haven't, I call my method, like when I work with clients, I call it loving agitation. And because I do really care about people, but I will call them out because my highest purpose is their dream, right? But when I've said this to people, I just want to share this with you and our listeners. Like, I almost introduce it as a new thing, but I've never had anyone, and people I work with, they've known my work for a while. I've never had anyone be like, oh, really? They were like, oh, yeah, of course.
Mm.
Because, and this is, I guess, one of the learnings that I've had, and is as much as I thought I was like holding back that part of myself, I think it was coming out anyway. But
Mhm.
just, I love what you said about resentment because I wasn't acknowledging it and allowing myself to be authentic fully. I love that resentment. I didn't think about that. Um, so yeah, what a beautiful thing to share. I'm so grateful I asked you that. And what you said, Melody, I mean, this is how I define reinvention. I think of reinvention. It's not about becoming someone new or some shiny version of ourselves. It's actually becoming more of who we are.
Mhm.
And so you're still a kind and compassionate person. I read your content and now you also get to be more yourself and direct. So I cannot wait for the world to read your second book because I bet both is in there. Both parts of you are in there and more.
That that's right. And I love your idea of reinvention. It's more of an evolution. And what's interesting, I would love to hear from you that I feel it's more like coming home or coming full
Yes.
circle rather than going in a different direction. Um, and that's exciting. That's exciting because, like you said, it doesn't feel unfamiliar. It feels more satisfying because of that.
Because I think it become more of who we are. The analogy I use for reinvention is the one we've all heard is when Michelangelo said that the sculpture is already in the piece of marble. All he has to do is chisel away at the unnecessary parts. That's the analogy. We all have our inner masterpiece. We have our authentic self. It gets covered up in stuff. It gets covered up in things we think people want us to do or what we think we're capable of or what we deserve, all kinds of things. And that's the work, is just to chisel away and just bring out all the parts, the sweet and kind and compassionate Melody and the straight talker and the loving Natalie and the agitation, because I do agitate, I run these, I actually have one right after I run these, I call them reinventability accelerators, which are kind of these like small group mentorship programs for 3 months. And I tell everyone in it always, like, if you don't get annoyed at me at least once, I mean, like really annoyed, you need to tell me, because I'm really not doing my job. Right. And every time I say that, I feel very true. Do you know that feeling? I think that's what you mean by satisfying, is just
Yes.
we are really true to who we are.
Yes, 100%. And I love what did you call it? Kind agitation, or how did you say it?
Loving agitation.
Loving. Loving agitation. Yeah. And it reminds me of that idea that there is a difference between being nice and being kind, right?
Yes.
Being nice is just being a pushover, being agreeable to go along to get along, right? But being kind is telling people the truth when they need to hear it in a diplomatic and a tactful way. And all of us, like, I need a loving agitator in my life, because
Yes.
we're all just on autopilot every single day. You can't see those things. And to have you use the word gift before, and
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that with me, because I really appreciate it, that I'm not an asshole. So that's nice to hear.
Never
um,
thought that
but
once.
yeah, but we all need that outside person to sort
Yeah.
shake things up, because you can't see it for yourself. Or to your point, you go to these extremes in your head. Like, if I step into a bolder version of myself, then I'm going to go off the deep end and be so
Yeah.
big-headed, and people will think I'm conceited. We go from point A to point Z,
Mhm.
instead of realizing that, no, to your point, at the end of the day, you will still be yourself, just maybe a little more dialed up version, but you're not going to become a completely different person overnight and swing from one end to the other.
I think that's such a good reminder for like when we're afraid of that. One of the reinventions I'm going through is I started to paint about 9 years ago. So, you're looking at my art behind me, and it was after I
Beautiful. Yeah.
suffered a really horrible burnout and was just on this in a really dark place, but also for the first time in my life, like asking myself who I was and what I wanted to do versus the thing I should do.
Mhm.
Um, and so I've been painting for 9 years, but I've been doing it pretty quietly, meaning not so quietly. My painting is on the cover of my second book, and I show my art on stage when I speak, and here it is on in my background. But I've done it kind of like, and I'm an artist, like, oh, to the
Mhm.
side. And something that I've decided, I'm turning 50 this year, so I've decided, enough. And I'm going to really embrace myself as an artist. I'm an artist, just like I'm a mom and a wife and a speaker and an author and a mentor. Like, I'm an artist.
Mhm.
And to your point, I've kind of felt this hesitation, like, oh, if I talk about my art more, like say on LinkedIn, are people going to think I've given up all my other work? No,
Yeah.
no one thinks that but ourselves. Nobody thinks that. Only ourselves. I think it's such a great point. We go to these extremes. So I love that you brought that up, because it's such a great reminder that we have these dimensions and we just want to unearth as many of them as are meaningful and authentic to us,
Yeah.
without feeling like we have to be one or the other. Right. You can be a kind and compassionate person and a straight talker, and I can be a speaker and an author and an artist. Someone I was talking to, one of my clients was like, because I was sharing this with her, and she was like, yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's like a fitness guru, and he was a governor,
True.
and he was an actor. And I'm like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, it's good kind of to think about that. Oh, I love that we got to talk about that. I'm so glad I asked you that question. All right.
Yeah.
Now I want to talk about, trusting yourself. I want to talk about that first, because a lot of what I read in your book really resonated with me. And frankly, I find this one of the most challenging things to do for myself, and also like for high achievers, interestingly.
Mhm.
So I'd love for you to talk about, um, how do we shift, like we get into this place where we get really like almost addicted to external validation. Right. And it can be like someone saying good job, or you get awards, or I don't know, you get a raise or whatever. The book makes it some list, whatever. And our brain loves that, because it's like tells us we're safe, we belong, right? Hey, you've
Mhm.
recognized. How do we shift out of that? And how do we get to a place where I'm not going to say we don't care because I don't think that's possible, but we don't rely on that as a source of kind of our self-worth.
Yeah, because that's a very precarious place to be because you can't control when you get that, right?
Mhm. Or
Or
if
how
you
it
get
comes
that,
in. Yeah, if you
right?
get that at all, right. And I think to you made a great point about like where does this come from, right? It's very rewarding for our brain. We get the dopamine hit. We feel like we belong. And there's a concept I talk about in Trust Yourself called the honor roll hangover that I think applies here too, because you mentioned the idea of, especially for us high achievers. And we have this gold star mentality that follows us
Mhm.
from when we're younger, right? We want the gold stars, we want the A plus, we want to be the
Yep.
good girl or boy. And that same mentality follows us throughout our career. Except what happens is we don't have the clear markers of success to go after anymore. And so we just start attaching ourselves to anything, right? And you become desperate for the positive performance review, or did my boss use an exclamation point instead of a period
Oh
in
my
this? And that,
God,
that means they're
yes.
happier, right?
Yes.
And we almost become codependent on our careers and our jobs that when things are going well, we feel good about ourselves. And when things aren't going well, we're down in the dumps. We feel like we're a failure. We're not enough. And so the honor roll hangover is really at the core of all of that. And so you were asking, how do you start detaching from this?
Mhm.
So many ways, but let's start with something I talk about early on in Trust Yourself is this idea of detoxing from your goals, because so many of us are goal collectors. We're walking around with these aspirations that may or may not be ours, may or may not even be currently where we want to go,
Mhm.
yet we're still holding on to them. And so, something like your painting is a great example, right? There may be things you had to let go of in order to make space for your art. And so I think letting go of goals, we always talk about going
Mm.
after goals, but we don't talk enough about quitting goals, which I think
Yeah.
is important for us high achievers who tend to just rigidly try to do more and more and more,
Mhm.
expand our plate instead of figuring out what do we need to take off of it.
I love that, and I think one of the as you're talking about, I'm thinking about well, first, I just have to share you when you said the honor roll hangover. I had this memory come up. This isn't about the honor roll, but when my daughter, who's now 20, when she was little, she's in preschool and kindergarten, they get like awards all the time. I remember I was picking her up from first grade once, and she was so excited to tell me that she got the award for being the most helpful in the classroom. And I was like, "What did you do?" She's like, "I pushed the chairs back in after lunch." And I remember in that moment going like, oh my God, I pushed the chair in after lunch and I made your lunch and I like did all the things, but I didn't get an award. And I remember for a while, like I had this idea. I was like, we need like awards for adults, like
Yeah.
giant trophies that just says like, hey, you got through the day. So it is early on, right? And then as you say, we lose those markers, um, like the success markers. And I think that what you just said about aspirations is so powerful because it's kind of like I used to talk about this in the context of happiness. Like, I'll be happy when I get the promotion, I get a raise, I launch my company, people buy 20,000 of my books, whatever. And it's a constantly moving thing because we get used to things and then we want more dopamine. So we have to do new thing. It's kind of the same idea that a question that I like to ask my clients is what will be enough,
Yeah.
right? Like at what point, well, I had this woman, I think you'll appreciate this. I had this woman who she's an amazing mom of four and a leader in her community and an executive at work and I can keep going. And she was getting an award from her community for being a woman of influence.
Mm.
And she was saying to me, she's like, I'm so uncomfortable with this. I don't think I've done enough to earn it. And I said, you know what? I want you to give me a list right now of what you need to do. Give me a list. What do you need to do? Cure cancer? Like what would be enough? And it helped to realize. So do you think that's part of it? Is that we're collecting these goals because we feel like at some point we'll feel like we're good enough?
Yeah. And it's that idea you were talking about of the arrival fallacy that we'll get to a point where we've done enough that we feel complete. But to your point, the goalpost just keeps moving. There's always more you can learn. And this is in Trust Yourself, I talk a lot about imposter syndrome. And this is at the core of imposter syndrome, that you feel like there's always another certification or degree I could get. There's always more I could learn before I speak up and could be qualified as an expert on this. And so, yes, letting go of some of that is really, really key. But what we also have to realize, you were talking about, that person wasn't appreciating their wins and hadn't defined what enough
Mm,
was. And a question I always find myself asking clients is, what are you trying to optimize for here? Because when we try to optimize for everything, right? I want to spend time with my family. I want to be successful at work. I want to be a pillar of my community, on and on and on and on. You can't do that. You're going to spread yourself so thin. You're going to take on too much. You're going to feel like I'm not doing well in any one area. And so when I ask that question, usually it's around people's work and career. What are you trying to optimize for? Is it learning and growth? Is it advancement in the organization? Is it financially? Is it money and compensation right now? Is it flexibility? And
mhm,
that can help crystallize, why am I doing this? And what values am I trying to meet through this action or this decision? Because we can't do everything. And so personally, I find that one of the most helpful questions. What am I trying to optimize for here?
mm.
Because it helps me understand what is enough. What does success look like? That is my version. Someone else may be trying to optimize for something else. And I personally have found that very helpful.
I think that is incredibly helpful. It's kind of another one of the questions I like to ask myself and people I work with is like, why do you want what you want?
Mm.
Right? Because often, right, it's easy to get to like, oh, I want a promotion or I want my book to be on a list or whatever. Well, why do we want that? Because there may be another way to get that thing that you actually want, right? Um, really useful. So connected to this, right? We're talking about external validation. Um, at the same time, we are social animals and it is important for us to be recognized. And it's, I think, essential to feel like what we're doing matters and is recognized, especially in the world of work. And something that I was, when I was working on my questions for you, I realized something that and I'm, and I hesitate to say this is more common for women than men, although there's a lot of studies that show it's much more common for women to not advocate for themselves and their work at work. And it's something I definitely did not do for a lot of my career. Can you talk about how we can advocate for ourselves in a way, because the reaction I often get from people is like, oh, does that just mean like I run around and tell everyone how great I am? And that just feels horrible. And I don't want to do it at humble bragging or exact. Like, how do we do that? Like, because to me, those are two, like, kind of on two sides of the coin. Like, we don't want to be dependent on external validation, but it is important for us to speak about our work and to advocate for ourselves.
You're right. It's a both and, not an either or. And I'm all about balance, right?
Mm,
We want to find the sweet spot of having enough validation to know we're moving in the direction that is important to us, but not excessively so that we're dependent and we're jerked
mm,
around at the whim if we do or don't get it. And when it comes to recognition, or being having visibility, let's call it, for your contributions, this is an area where that comes into play, because you want to make sure that people know what you're contributing. And to some extent, getting that recognition lets you know you're on the right track, you're providing
mhm,
value. And I think within there is a mindset shift around that, from self promotion being selfish to realizing that this is part of your job, just like anything else is, because you have a responsibility to inform the people above you and around you of the progress you and your team are making, because they're dependent on that
mhm,
information, right? Your boss may need data about wins that you're getting or milestones that you've hit,
mm,
because they need to report up their own chain of command so that your team gets more resources. And so it's not so much about bragging or showboating, it's about informing people so they have the
mm,
data they need to make decisions. And so that when you speak up, you have credibility. People listen to you. And one of my driving reasons behind writing Managing Up is, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is that when good-hearted people are in power, everything changes for the better. And so I hope you would agree with this too, that we want people who are great at getting things done, that have good intentions, that are empathetic. If you are in positions of influence and sway, because people see the value you bring, then you're going to be able to have a positive ripple effect on everything
Mm.
else that happens around you. And so think about this as being in service of your team, the organization, getting what they need.
I think that is one of the most important mindset shifts that you just talked about. This mindset shift away from this is me bragging about myself, this is about me, this is selfish, and to see it as in service of something greater than you, your colleagues, your team, the organizations. I worked with this woman leader once who was up for a giant promotion. She would become one of the most senior executives in her company. And she, as often you have to do, she had to write essentially like a self-evaluation for it. And she called me up and she said, I can't do this. And I said, what's going on? She said, I feel like I'm like a defense attorney right now. Like I'm just defending my accomplishment and I hate it. I hate it. And so I said to her, I said, tell me why do you want the promotion? And she said, one of the reasons is because I'd be leading a much bigger team. And it's something I'm really great at. Like my team at work right now is high performing. They're doing great. They're thriving. And if I have a much bigger team, I could impact so many more people in that way. I said, great. I said, now write the self-evaluation with the sole purpose of making sure that you get to lead those people in that positive way. She hung up the phone and she called me or whatever, texted me a couple of days later. She was like, oh my God, it just flowed out of me. She ended up getting the promotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the beautiful mindset shift that you're talking about. And I think it's, to be honest, Melody, like one of the most powerful things I've heard because, and I think we can bring that into many parts of our lives, but just recognizing that we are part of something bigger, even if you're in a small company. You have colleagues, you have a leader, there are customers, there are people in the community, and to advocate for ourselves. And the other thing I love what you said is the word inform. It's not justify, convince, it's to inform. Can you talk about that a little more? I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think inform, but I would also add to that another verb, which is translate. Because what we may be accomplishing things day to day, but we have to translate that to why it's important, what it means for the organization or the team. Because, okay, maybe let's just take a very, very simple example. Like you create some sort of new process or you've created a deck or enter data into a spreadsheet. What's the higher order impact of that? What's the so what? The task that you did was enter that data. But what does that mean? Does that mean another team is unblocked and can move ahead with a project? Does that mean you're now going to be able to put together a more solid analysis for a client? What's the so what? What's the outcome? And that's what we have to draw a connection to when we talk to people about, okay, so the data is in the spreadsheet and this will allow so-and-so team to move ahead with that. And then we can move more quickly on getting this, project off the ground, right? That's so much more impactful than, okay, task done, it's in the spreadsheet. And so that's what I mean by informing is that everyone is overwhelmed with information. And if we don't tell people what the meaning of what we did is, they may fill in the gaps. And unfortunately, they may fill in the gaps negatively or make their own interpretation or just move on. And then and then we feel, going back to resentment, we feel resentful because we think, hey, I played a role in this and I'm not getting seen for that, or I feel overlooked. And it's because we didn't do that translation or that informing piece to make it meaningful to someone else.
I love that. One of the things you talk about in your book, actually, I'll show everyone the book because I have a galley. Strong title. I love it. So one of the things I bookmarked this page that you talk about that I really love is that connects to this is casting your 1 year vision for where you want to be, and then thinking about how to communicate the things you're doing in a way that reflects to people that these are your strengths. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's a really important connection, right? It goes back to, we have to first decide what we want,
Yes.
and then we can inform and translate and communicate the work we're doing as it aligns with that. And I love, you have a story in here somewhere, and you can tell it better, but it was someone at a company who was really good at taking over low sales and making them
Mhm.
better. So they started to assign him just to low performing places because
Yes.
that's what he got known for. So can you
Mhm.
talk about this idea of like thinking about our 1 year vision, deciding what we want to be doing, and then how do we connect that to the way we talk about our work?
Yeah. Your 1 year vision, put very simply, is if you imagine yourself 365 days from now, what do you want it to be different for you at work in terms of the tasks you have, the responsibilities, the scope, the scale you're operating at, the relationships you do or don't have? What does that look like? And there's more prompts for this in the book, but it's really the foundation of everything, because the irony of writing a book about managing up and, you know, getting what you need from the other people is that it has to start with you. And that at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, managing up is something you do for your own benefit, not necessarily for your leader's benefit. And that's because that's a great example of how you can use managing up as a way to shape your career and your direction. Because your 1 year career vision comes back into play. I have an entire chapter on the visibility conversation. And in that, what you're alluding to is I talk about how you can use your 1 year vision as a filter for what you do and don't bring visibility to. Because I think a mistake a lot of people make is we hear you should be visible, bring attention to your accomplishments, talk about them. And that's where we can go wrong, where we're bringing attention to everything and we haven't thought through this intentionally. And then we're pigeonholed, or we build a personal brand or a reputation around something we don't want to be known for at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, to give you another example of this, about a year ago, I had a client who was a kind of a generalist marketing producer. And what ended up happening is the organization went through a couple of reorgs. She went from being a leader of people down to a IC, or rather was transitioned to an individual contributor role. And she felt very stuck, really rocked her confidence too, to think, do they not find me valuable? And so she was recovering from a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
But what she realized was this was a very valuable chance to use her own 1 year vision to build a different reputation for herself. So instead of being known as just the generalist marketing person who could work on, these sorts of paid ad campaigns and social and digital and things like that, she really started to bring visibility to email in particular. Email, open rates, click through rates, the split testing, things like that. And that was what she used as her filter for her visibility. And what ended up happening is, flash forward a couple of months, and she was tapped for an opportunity to lead an email center of excellence at her organization, because that's what she had very intentionally brought attention to. So that's the power of this here, that when you build a narrative, when you are able to tell stories and anecdotes to provide value in that area, that's what you start to become known for. That's what you're top of mind of people for.
And I love that it begins with you deciding what is it that you want, because that's kind of I think often, I think it's kind of our conversation is full circle, because I think that's often what we don't stop to really be intentional about, right? In our search for validation, right? We kind of maybe share all the things, maybe don't share our work enough, but sometimes kind of share all the things because we would love to be seen and validated without intentionally thinking about what is
Yeah.
it that I would love to be doing more? What is it that I'd love to be doing less? And therefore, from the things I'm doing, what is it that I really want to highlight? I think that's a really powerful idea, and something that just brings us back to maybe the last question I want to ask you is, I think often the power of choice, right? The fact that we can choose to craft our careers, even in an organization without having to switch jobs. We can choose to create a certain narrative. We can choose to trust ourselves more than rely. I guess one of the questions, a last question I want to ask you is, you have a lot of experience. You work with some really like high achievers. You've written 2 books. What is a really common mistake that you see people making when it comes to kind of crafting a career they're really excited about? And I know it's a giant question, but maybe in the sphere that we've talked about, because I often ask about mistakes because I feel like we can learn so much.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is making themselves indispensable instead of making themselves invaluable. The differentiator there is that when you are indispensable, no one else can do what you do, and you are stuck there. And when you are indispensable, you don't say no. And you become known as the dumping ground. You become seen as someone who, because you don't push back,
Mm,
leadership starts to think you don't know how to prioritize. You don't know how to have difficult conversations. You play it a little too safe. That's not what we need from someone who has to operate at a higher level. Now, being invaluable means that you provide value to the organization no matter what role you're in. And so that's a mistake I see for a lot of people, is that they want to
mm,
advance, but they hit barriers when the people above them say, but no one else can do your job. Who's going to do this? And so you need to be thinking about, identifying your successors and bringing up people around you, creating processes and systems so you are
mm.
not going back to that word of pigeonholed into your role, and that idea of pushing back, of saying no, because of course that's a way to prevent yourself from burnout and just make it more
Yeah.
sustainable. But what we don't realize is that that also shows a lot of leadership capability when you are able to do that.
I think I love your advice, Melody, and such a good distinction in between indispensable and invaluable. And I just want to broaden this. I think it goes into every part of our lives, right? That um, we really want to focus, especially when it comes to saying no. Like, we want to focus on doing things where we can generate the greatest value and understand that we are not indispensable and that other people can do other things, and to not be afraid to say no and to ask for help. I think that also connects, right? Because the other thing, I definitely am guilty of this. I used to do this a lot as an overachiever, and I see a lot of high achievers do, is feeling like we have to say yes to everything because I'm so capable. Of course, I say yes to everything, and I'm gonna guess you have advice for that too. Maybe we can wrap that, because it comes from a good place, I think, but I also think it comes from a place of fear
Yeah.
of being seen as not helpful, not capable enough. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as a last thing, because I love your
Yeah.
insight between indispensable and invaluable.
And in Trust Yourself, I talk about this as having unbalanced responsibility, right?
Mm,
That when we're over extended in our responsibility, we're over functioning, right? We're volunteering we're the first person to raise our hands. We're saying yes to everything. But when you overfunction, you can create this dynamic where other people underfunction, where they do not step up. They have no reason to follow through or be accountable. And then you feel even more frustrated with the situation. And so when it comes to saying no, flipping between books here, in my new book, Managing Up, there's an entire chapter on the boundaries conversation, because we need to be tactful about how we do this. You can't
yes.
just say no to a client or your boss. You can't say, I'm not doing that. Thanks, but no thanks. It's not going to go over well. And so first thing you want to do, you want to ask questions, because it gives you a bit of a pause, space between stimulus and response.
Mm,
And it also gives you more information where you can either discern, actually, could this be an opportunity for me or something I'm interested in? And can you get information from the person about what's involved, the timeline, how long do you need me? Is this ongoing or just one time? That can also give you information to latch onto to say, you know what, this actually sounds like it would be something better for the operations team. Let me loop
Mm.
them in on this. And from there, one of my favorite techniques in that chapter is called the trade off approach, which is all about presenting, okay, I understand X is important. Adding Y to that would jeopardize our timeline potentially. So, how would you like us to reprioritize rather, or what would you like us to deprioritize, delegate, slow down on? And the magic of that is that you are you are framing the situation to subtly say both of these are not possible. We have a binary. You can choose one here.
Uh-huh.
And you're putting the ultimate authority back in the other person's hands. So, especially if you're dealing with someone that positionally is much higher than you, that can be great because at the end of the day, they feel like they have more of a say.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, and what I love about that is, often when we talk about boundaries or saying no, it feels very like um, the whole decision's on you, very authoritarian. I just love your approach on ask questions, make this a conversation, and focus on like learning as much as you can. And then kind of to me, it's also, I often think of, I often talk about saying no is it's not saying no, it's saying yes to what's most important. And so use this conversation to help you and the other person or other people come up with that, right? Because the answer might be to say yes to the new thing and no to something else. But I love just your approach about it as a conversation versus saying no, which feels strange in a
Mhm.
work context and wrong. And I think a lot of people don't do it for that reason.
Mhm.
Melody, I could talk to you for a long time. Thank you for being here. Your insights are really, I love how specific they are, but also everything. I love the intentionality of your work and the sense of, I guess when I was reading some of your book and I haven't finished it, but just the sense of agency that it fills us with. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and a lot of fun. We'll have to connect. I have some thoughts I want to talk to you
Yeah.
about offline, but thank you. And as always, thank you to our listeners, or if you're watching on YouTube, hi. And that's all we have today. I will be in your ear or on your screen next week with another episode of Reinventability. Have an awesome week, everyone.